Sia Vance did not belong in that penthouse. She was a professional in a world of predators. No alliances, no leverage, no reason for anyone in that room to let her walk out alive. But a little boy in a white suit did not know any of that. 6 years old, dressed sharper than most men she had ever worked for, eyes bright with a trust that had no business existing in a place like this. He crossed the marble floor, looked up at her clipboard, and smiled. "Are you my new nanny?" Behind him, in the shadow of the floor-to-ceiling windows, his father, the most feared man in the city, watched in complete silence. In the next 10 minutes, that little boy would make it impossible for Sia to ever walk away. If that opening just gave you chills, you're in the right place. This channel lives for stories that keep you up at night, love, loss, and the choices that change everything. Smash that subscribe button before this gets any more intense. Let's continue. The ironclad contract. Sia did not move. Her clipboard was still pressed against her chest, her breathing still measured, her face still professionally blank. She had trained herself to look calm in difficult rooms. Boardrooms. Courtrooms. Once, a burning building. But nothing in 15 years of work had prepared her for a 6-year-old boy smiling up at her like she was the answer to a question he had been carrying for a long time. "I asked if you were my new nanny," Ji-ho said again, patient and unbothered. "I heard you," Sia said softly. She crouched down slowly, the way she always did with young children, lowering herself to their level, making herself less like a stranger. Up close, she could see the small silver pin on his lapel. A dragon, barely the size of her thumbnail. The suit he wore was perfectly fitted, not a single wrinkle. Someone had dressed this child with great care. But the look in his eyes, curious, a little too steady for his age, told her that care and warmth were two very different things in this penthouse. "My name is Ji-ho," he said, extending his hand. She shook it. "Sia." He smiled wider. "I like that name." Behind him, the room had not moved. The men in dark suits stood like furniture. Still. Watching. The tall man by the window had not shifted an inch. But something in the air had changed the moment she touched the boy's hand. She felt it without looking up. A current. A warning. She stood slowly and finally looked at the man in black. He was not what she had expected. The agency file had said private client, high net worth, single father, requires experienced governess for 1 child. Standard language. Clean. The kind of file she had accepted dozens of times. But no file had ever described a man who carried silence the way other men carried weapons, deliberately, and with full awareness of the damage it could do. Sung-ho Ryu did not introduce himself. He did not need to. Sia had spent enough time in powerful rooms to know the difference between a man who had earned his authority and a man who had simply bought it. This man had earned every inch of the stillness around him. Her mind moved quickly, pulling together everything she had ignored on the drive over. The unmarked building. The 3 security checks before the elevator. The guards who had not smiled once. She knew who he was before he spoke a single word. The city had a name for him. Not spoken loudly, and never twice in the same place. Her fingers tightened around the clipboard. "Miss Vance." His voice was low and even, the kind that did not need volume to fill a room. "Sit down." It was not an invitation. She sat. A man she had not noticed before, older, with a thin smile that did not reach his eyes, stepped forward from the edge of the room and placed a folder on the table in front of her. Thick. Bound with a dark ribbon. Her name was already printed on the cover. "Your contract," Sung-ho said. Sia did not open it. "I haven't agreed to anything yet." "No," he said. "But you will." Ji-ho had climbed onto the sofa beside her, close but not touching, watching her with that same steady gaze. She could feel him there, a small warm presence at her side, completely unaware of the tension pulling tight across the room like a wire. She opened the folder. The number on the first page made her blink once. Just once. She had negotiated high fees before, but this was not a fee. It was a statement. It was the kind of number that told a person their freedom had already been purchased, and the paperwork was simply a formality. She turned the page. The terms were precise. She would live on the property. She would have no contact with outside agencies during the contract period. She would not discuss her employer, the child, or the household with any third party. Violation of any clause would result in. The language was careful here, almost gentle, consequences the agency would not be able to assist with. Sia looked up. The thin-smiled man was still watching her. Something in his expression was almost curious, the way a person looks at something they expect to break. She looked back down at the page. Jiho shifted beside her, and she felt his small fingers brush her sleeve, not grabbing, just touching, the way a child reaches for something familiar before they fully understand why. She thought about standing up. Thought about placing the folder back on the table, smoothing her blazer, and walking to the elevator with her professional reputation intact. She had a code. She had rules. She had built her entire career on knowing exactly which rooms to walk out of. But Jiho's fingers were still resting lightly against her sleeve. And the thin-smiled man was still watching, and his expression had shifted now into something that looked, just barely, like a dare. Sia picked up the pen. She signed her name in clean, unhurried letters across the bottom of the final page, closed the folder, and placed it back on the table. She did not look at Sung-ho. She looked at Jiho. "Do you have homework?" she asked. The boy's face broke open into a grin so sudden and so genuine that it felt like a window being thrown open in a sealed room. "Yes," he said. "Lots." "Then let's start there," Sia said, and stood up, clipboard still in hand, stepping forward into the most dangerous contract she had ever signed. The bedroom they gave Jiho was the size of a small apartment. Sia stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. Everything was expensive. The desk was solid dark wood, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The shelves were full of books, all of them arranged by height rather than title, which told her immediately that someone other than the boy had organized them. The bed was made with military precision, corners tucked sharp, pillows centered, and not a single toy was visible anywhere in the room. It looked like a display. Not a place where a child actually lived. Jiho walked past her and sat at the desk, pulling his school bag onto his lap with the quiet routine of a boy who had long ago learned to occupy himself. He did not complain about the room. He did not even seem to notice it. That bothered her more than anything else she had seen that evening. She set her clipboard on the edge of the desk and pulled the second chair close. "Show me what you're working on." He spread his worksheets out carefully, smoothing each page flat before sliding them toward her. Mathematics. Reading comprehension. A short writing exercise about something that made him happy. That last page was blank. Sia said nothing about it. Not yet. They worked quietly for an hour. Jiho was sharp, quicker than she expected, with a focused kind of patience that most children his age did not have. But every time she praised him, even simply, even just a nod or a soft good, he looked at her with brief surprise before looking back down at his page. As if approval was something he had learned not to expect. She filed that away carefully. When the worksheets were done and packed neatly back into his bag, she walked him through his bedtime routine, teeth, a face, a clean set of clothes laid out for morning. He followed each step without argument, which was either excellent discipline or something quieter and sadder that she was not ready to name yet. She had just turned off his beside lamp when the door opened. Sung-ho did not knock. He stood in the frame, still in his dark jacket, and looked at his son the way a man looks at something precious that he does not quite know how to hold. There was nothing cold in that look. But there was distance. Wide and practiced, the kind that had been built up carefully over time. "Sleep," he said to Ji-ho. "Good night, Appa," the boy said. Sung-ho gave a single nod, and his eyes moved to Sia. He stepped back into the hallway. She understood she was expected to follow. She did, pulling the door gently closed behind her. Two of his guards stood further down the corridor, still and silent as posts. Sung-ho turned to face her, and in the low light of the hallway, he looked less like a shadow and more like a man who carried too many things and had nowhere left to put them. "His schedule," he said, and held out a single folded card. She took it and opened it. Every hour from 6 in the morning to 9 at night was accounted for. Meals, study, language tutoring, physical training, rest. There was no gap. No unstructured time. No space for a child to simply be bored and wander and discover something on his own. "This needs to change," Sia said. The hallway went very quiet. One of the guards at the far end shifted his weight. Sung-ho looked at her without expression, which she was already beginning to understand was not the same as looking at her without feeling. "The schedule works," he said. "It keeps him busy," Sia said. "That is not the same thing. He needs time that belongs to him. Time with no instruction and no expectation. Children do not grow properly without it." A long pause. "You signed a contract, Miss Vance." "Not a charter to redesign my household." "I signed a contract to care for your son," she said, keeping her voice even. "That is exactly what I am doing." He studied her for a moment. She did not look away. Down the hall, the thin-smiled man from earlier appeared from a side room, pausing when he saw them. He glanced between Sia and Sung-ho with that same measuring look she had noticed before, calculating, patient, like a man who collected information the way others collected money. "Mr. Ryu," he said smoothly. "When you're finished." Sung-ho held Sia's gaze for one more second. Then he said, quietly and with absolute finality, 1 hour. Free time. After the afternoon study block. Nothing else changes. He walked away before she could respond. Sia stood in the corridor, contract in one hand, amended schedule already forming in her mind. 1 hour was not enough. But it was a start, and she had learned long ago that in negotiations, whether in boardrooms or hallways, a start was everything. She looked down at the folded card in her hand. Then she looked toward the door where the thin-smiled man had disappeared. In her years of work, she had learned to read rooms and the people inside them. She had learned which silences were peaceful and which ones were loaded. The guards here were not simply security. They were a message, repeated constantly, to anyone inside these walls, including, she now understood, her. She was being watched. She tucked the schedule card into her clipboard, turned back toward Ji-ho's room, and sat down quietly outside his door. If they were going to watch her, she decided, they were going to watch her do her job. The blank page bothered her all night. Sia lay in the room they had assigned her, clean, quiet, facing the city, and stared at the ceiling while the lights of Seoul moved slowly across the wall. She had worked with difficult children before. Children who screamed and threw things. Children who shut down completely. Children who had learned, very early, that the world was not a safe place to be honest in. Ji-ho was none of those things. He was polite and cooperative and completely, heartbreakingly unreachable. The blank page was the clearest thing he had said to her all evening, and he had not said a word. She was up before 6. By the time Ji-ho appeared in the kitchen doorway, still straightening his collar with small, serious fingers, Sia had already moved 3 things. She had pushed the kitchen table 2 feet toward the window so the morning light fell across it properly. She had found a bowl of fruit buried behind a row of protein supplements in the refrigerator and placed it in the center of the table. And she had located, after a thorough search of 4 cabinets, a box of pancake mix that had never been opened. Ji-ho stopped in the doorway and looked at the table. Then at the pan on the stove. Then at her. The cook comes at 7, he said carefully. I know, Sia said. Sit down. He sat. She could feel him watching her as she worked, the same focused attention he gave his worksheets, quiet, absorbing, trying to understand the system behind what he was seeing. She did not explain herself. She just cooked, and after a moment, the smell of warm butter filled the kitchen, and something in the boy's shoulders dropped just slightly. She set the plate in front of him. He looked at it. Then up at her. You made a face. She looked down. She had shaped the pancake without thinking. Round head, 2 small ears, a lopsided smile made from a curl of banana. I did, she agreed, sitting across from him with her coffee. A pause. Then Jiho laughed. It was a short sound, almost startled, like it had escaped before he could stop it. He covered his mouth immediately, but his eyes stayed bright above his hand, and Sia felt something in her chest settle into place. Eat, she said simply. He ate. That afternoon, she used his free hour. She had found a set of plain sketchbooks in a supply cabinet. Untouched, still wrapped in plastic, and she placed one on the desk in front of him along with a small tin of colored pencils. He looked at them the way he had looked at the pancake. Like something unfamiliar that he was not sure he was allowed to want. No instructions, she said. No right answer. Just draw whatever is in your head. He picked up a pencil slowly. She moved to the window with a book and left him alone with it. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. She did not look up. She turned her pages at a normal pace and let the silence breathe. Then she heard the soft scratch of pencil on paper, hesitant at first, then steadier. She kept her eyes on her book. When the hour ended, she did not ask to see what he had drawn. She simply said, same time tomorrow, and moved them into the next block of the schedule. Later, she found out anyway. She had gone back to straighten the desk after dinner and the sketchbook was still open. She had not meant to look, but the image was large and drawn with surprising confidence for a 6-year-old. 2 figures. One small, in a white suit. One taller, in gray, holding a clipboard. They were standing side by side, and above them, in careful, uneven letters, Jiho had written one word, together. Sia closed the sketchbook gently and left it exactly where it was. She did not hear Sung-ho until she turned around. He was standing in the hallway just beyond the open door, still in his jacket, and he was looking at the sketchbook on the desk with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the cold authority of the contract room. Not the practice distance of the corridor. Something quieter than both. Something that looked, just briefly, like a man catching sight of something he had not known he was missing. He did not say anything for a long moment. Sia stayed where she was and did not pretend she had not noticed him. He does not usually draw, Sung-ho said finally. His voice was even, but it was not the same evenness as before. This one had something underneath it. He does now, Sia said. Another silence. The city hummed faintly beyond the glass. Somewhere deeper in the penthouse, one of the guards changed position, and the sound of footsteps faded. Sung-ho looked away from the sketchbook and at her. The measuring quality was still there, it seemed to be a permanent feature of how he looked at the world, but there was something else alongside it now. Not warmth, exactly. More like the space where warmth might eventually be permitted to exist. The schedule adjustment, he said. It appears to be working. It was the closest thing to a concession she suspected he had ever offered anyone. It's one day, she said. But yes. He nodded once, turned, and walked back down the corridor. Sia looked at the closed sketchbook for a moment longer. Then she picked up her clipboard, switched off the desk lamp, and quietly pulled Jiho's door shut behind her. The outing had been Jiho's idea. He had asked quietly, the way he asked for most things, not demanding, not hopeful enough to be disappointed, just placing the request on the table and waiting to see what happened to it. There was a park 3 blocks from the building. He had seen it from the car once. He had not been there before. Sia had put it on the schedule herself. Getting approval had required 2 conversations with the head of security, 1 brief exchange with Sung-ho in which he said nothing but did not say no, and a logistics discussion with a guard named Mr. Park who had the build of a doorframe and the conversational warmth of one. The final arrangement was 3 guards. 1 ahead, 1 behind, 1 in a car running parallel, and a time limit of 90 minutes. Ji-ho wore his white suit. Sia had suggested something more casual and he had looked at her with such gentle confusion that she had let it go. Some children wore armor in the form of blankets or stuffed animals. Ji-ho wore his suit. She was not going to take that from him. The park was modest. A row of benches, a small climbing frame, a path looping around a fountain that was not running yet, still too early in the season. But Ji-ho walked into it like he was walking into somewhere vast and full of possibility, his eyes moving from the trees to the fountain to the other children already playing near the climbing frame. He looked at Sia. "Go ahead," she said. He went. She sat on the nearest bench, clipboard across her knees, and watched him approach the climbing frame with the same careful, observational patience he brought to everything. Within minutes, another boy had offered him a turn on the slide, and Ji-ho had accepted with a small, serious nod that made the other child laugh. Sia smiled and looked away, scanning the park the way she always did in unfamiliar spaces. Left to right, near to far. Old habit, built from years of managing children in public, knowing every exit, every stranger who lingered too long, every shift in the ordinary rhythm of a place. She noticed him on the second scan. A man on a bench diagonal to hers, on the far side of the fountain. Dark coat, unremarkable, a paper coffee cup in one hand. He was not looking at her or at Ji-ho. He was looking at his phone. But he had been in exactly the same position since before they arrived, she was certain of it, and in the 12 minutes since, he had not scrolled once, had not shifted his legs, had not done any of the small restless things people actually do when they are sitting alone with a phone. He was watching without appearing to watch. She did not move. She did not look at Mr. Park, who was stationed near the path behind her. She looked back at Ji-ho, who was now attempting the climbing frame with focused determination, and she kept the man in her peripheral vision and waited. 3 minutes later, a second man appeared at the park entrance. Different coat, different build, but the same quality of stillness. He chose a position that, alongside the first man, formed a loose angle around the bench where Sia was sitting. Not around Ji-ho. Around her. Her grip on the clipboard tightened once. Then she relaxed her hand deliberately. She gave it 5 more minutes. Then she stood, walked calmly to the climbing frame, and crouched beside Ji-ho. "We're going to head back in a little while," she said quietly. 5 more minutes, okay? He searched her face. He was perceptive in the same way his father was, picking up on things that weren't being said. "Is something wrong?" "Everything is fine," she said, and meant it to be reassuring rather than dismissive. "I just think your father will want to see the drawings you did this morning." Ji-ho accepted this and turned back to the climbing frame. Sia stood and took out her phone, typing a short message to the number Mr. Park had given her that morning. 2 individuals. South bench and east entrance. Not yours. She sent it and slid the phone back into her pocket without looking up. The ride back was quiet. Ji-ho sat beside her in the car, replaying some moment from the playground in his head with a small private smile. The 2 men had not followed them past the park gate. But they had watched until the car turned the corner, and Sia had watched them watching. Sung-ho was waiting in the main room when they returned. This in itself was unusual. He was rarely in common spaces during the day. Ji-ho greeted him and was guided toward his afternoon study block by Mr. Park, leaving Sia and Sung-ho alone in the wide, quiet room. He spoke before she did. Mr. Park showed me your message. Then you already know, she said. I want to hear it from you. She described both men precisely, position, clothing, behavior, timing. She described the angle they had formed and what it suggested about their objective. She did not speculate beyond what she had directly observed. When she finished, the room was still. Sung-ho looked at her with that measuring expression, but something in it had changed. The skepticism that had underlaid every interaction since her arrival had shifted into something more careful. More serious. Most people would not have noticed, he said. I noticed, Sia said simply. He was quiet for a moment. Then, almost to himself, I see. It was not a compliment. It was something more significant than that, the sound of a man revising his understanding of exactly who was living inside his walls. The penthouse was different at night. During the day it operated like a machine, guards rotating, phones ringing in distant rooms, the low murmur of men reporting to other men. There was always movement somewhere, always the sense that the building itself was working towards something. But after 10, when Ji-ho was asleep and the outer guards had settled into their positions, the penthouse exhaled. The corridors emptied. The lights dimmed to something almost human. Sia had learned to use this time. She would sit at Ji-ho's desk after he fell asleep, updating her notes, adjusting the following day's plan, writing small observations about his progress in the narrow notebook she kept separate from her clipboard. It was a habit from her earliest placements. Documenting the child, not the household. Building a picture of who they were beneath the surface of their daily routine. Tonight her notes kept circling back to the same thing. Ji-ho was getting better. Warmer, more open, quicker to laugh. But there was a shape missing from his world, and it was not something she could fill with pancakes or sketchbooks or free hours in the afternoon. It was the shape of a parent who was fully present. Not just in the building. Not just nodding from doorways. Present in the way that mattered, unhurried, undivided, simply there. She closed her notebook and stood. She had not intended to walk toward the study. She had intended to go to her room. But the light was on beneath the study door at the far end of the corridor, and it was past midnight, and something about that thin line of gold light in an otherwise dark hallway made her stop. She knocked twice, quietly. A pause. Then, come in. The study was the only room in the penthouse that felt genuinely lived in. The desk was buried under documents, maps, and folders marked in Korean she could not fully read. A half-empty glass of water sat on the corner. The shelves were dense with books that had clearly been opened and read rather than arranged for appearance. A single lamp burned on the desk, and Sung-ho sat behind it with his jacket off, his collar open, a pen held loosely in one hand. He looked, for the first time since she had arrived, like a person rather than a position. Miss Vance, he said. Not unwelcoming. Just careful. I saw the light, she said. I didn't mean to disturb you. You didn't. He set the pen down. Sit, if you want. She sat in the chair across the desk, the same instinct as always, putting herself at the same level. Old habit. She noticed him notice it. For a moment neither of them spoke. The city spread out behind him through the glass, all light and distance, and Sia thought that it must be a particular kind of loneliness, to look out at something that vast every night and know that most of it feared you. Ji-ho had a good day today, she said. After the park. I heard. A pause. He told me about the other boy at the climbing frame. He remembered his name. That's significant, Sia said. He's starting to reach outward. Sung-ho looked at the desk. Something moved across his face, brief and unguarded, a kind of relief that had clearly been waiting somewhere for a long time with nowhere to go. He was not always like this, he said quietly. The distance. He paused, choosing the word carefully, stillness. He was a different child before his mother left. Sia did not push. She had learned that people who carried heavy things did not need to be pulled at. They needed to feel the room was safe enough to set things down in. He still has that capacity, she said. It hasn't gone. It's just been waiting. Sung-ho looked at her. The lamp between them threw soft shadows across the desk, and in this light, without the guards and the contracts and the weight of the room he usually occupied, his face was younger than she had first understood. Still hard. Still watchful. But younger. You are not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone who would last 2 weeks, he said plainly. Take the money, tolerate the environment, leave quietly. They usually do. I don't leave quietly, Sia said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. But close enough to be remarkable on a face that rarely permitted the possibility. No, he said. I'm beginning to understand that. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. The earlier silences had been his controlled, deliberate, designed to establish distance. This one belonged to both of them equally, and neither of them moved to break it right away. The city hummed beyond the glass. The lamp burned steadily between them. It was Sia who looked away first, glancing at the layered documents across his desk. Even at this hour, even with his jacket off and the room quiet, the work was always there. The weight of it was always there. You should sleep, she said. Ji-ho notices when you're tired, even if he doesn't say so. Sung-ho looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression she could not fully name, not quite surprise, not quite gratitude, but something that lived in the space between the two. As if being considered by another person was something he had stopped expecting a long time ago. Good night, Miss Vance, he said. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked to the door. Sia, she said, without turning around. A pause behind her. Good night, Sia, he said. She pulled the door closed and stood in the dark corridor for just a moment, her hand still resting on the handle, the warmth of the room already fading behind her. She walked back to her room and did not open her notebook again. It started with a missing sketchbook. Ji-ho had left it in the main sitting room the evening before. She had seen it there herself, tucked beside the arm of the sofa where he liked to draw after dinner. But when she went to retrieve it the following morning before he woke, it was gone. She checked the study, the kitchen, the corridor outside his room. Nothing. It was a small thing, but Ji-ho had begun to fill that book with a quiet intensity that told her it mattered to him in ways he had not yet found words for. She went looking. The penthouse had a lower floor. She had been told this during her first walkthrough, a functional level used for storage and staff operations. She had never had reason to go there. The stairwell door required a code she had been given for emergencies, and she hesitated at the top of the stairs for a moment before deciding that a missing sketchbook counted as enough of a reason. The lower floor was cooler, the lighting practical rather than designed. She moved quietly out of habit, checking each room with a brief glance. A supply room, a laundry room, a long corridor that bent left toward what appeared to be a private meeting space. She heard the voices before she reached the bend. She stopped. The first voice belonged to the thin-smiled man. She had learned his name by now, Mr. Woon. Senior advisor to Sung-ho, present at every formal meeting, always positioned just slightly outside the center of any room so that he could see everyone in it. She had not trusted him since the first evening, and she had not spent much energy examining why. Some people simply carried a particular quality of stillness that felt less like patience and more like waiting. The second voice she did not recognize. Male, younger, speaking in a low and careful tone. She did not move. She kept her breathing shallow and her body still, pressed against the wall just before the bend. Most of what they said was in Korean. Her Korean was functional but not fluent. Enough to manage Ji-ho's bilingual lessons and follow basic household conversation, not enough to catch every word at speed. But she caught enough. Ji-ho's name. and a phrase she recognized from a document she had once translated for a previous employer in a different life, leverage point. The meaning was the same in any language. And then, clearly, in English, as if for emphasis, the boss won't see it coming. The conversation ended. Footsteps moved away from her, deeper into the lower floor, and a door opened and closed somewhere at the far end. Sia stood at the wall for a long moment without moving. Then she walked back upstairs, retrieved Jiho from his room, sat with him through breakfast, moved him through his morning study block, and did not allow a single thing to show on her face. This was the skill that had kept her employed in difficult households for 15 years. Not her organizational ability or her academic methods or even her instinct with children. It was this, the capacity to absorb dangerous information and continue operating without flinching. To file a thing away and wait for the right moment with the same patience she brought to everything else. But underneath the calm, her mind was working quickly. Mr. Woon had access to everything inside the penthouse. Sung-ho's schedule, his meetings, his security arrangements. More importantly, he had access to Jiho's routine, the park outings, the daily patterns, the 1 hour of unstructured time that now existed because she had argued for it. Every window of exposure the boy had to the outside world passed through Mr. Woon's awareness. The men at the park. She thought of them now with a new clarity. Different coats, different positions, but the same quality of purpose. They had not been watching Jiho. They had been watching her. Taking her measure, perhaps, or delivering a message to whoever had sent them. And the only people who had known about that outing in advance, beyond herself and the security team, were the senior staff of the household. Mr. Woon had known. She needed to tell Sung-ho. The difficulty was that she had no proof beyond what she had heard, and what she had heard was partial and interpreted through a second language. She could not walk into his office with fragments and instinct and expect them to land. Not in a world where information was currency and a wrong accusation could cost far more than a job. She needed to be precise. She needed to be certain. That evening, after Jiho was asleep, she sat at the small desk in her room and wrote everything down from memory, the time, the location, the exact words she had heard in both languages, the phrases she was certain of and the ones she had inferred. She wrote it in the clean, factual style of a professional report, stripped of emotion, containing nothing she could not directly support. She read it back twice. Then she looked at the door of her room and thought about the guards in the corridor and the fact that she did not yet know which ones reported directly to Sung-ho and which ones reported to Mr. Woon. She folded the paper once and pressed it flat inside the back cover of her notebook. Not yet. She would find the right moment and the right method. She would not rush this. Rushing was how people in dangerous houses made fatal mistakes, and Sia Vance had not survived 15 years of difficult rooms by being careless with the things that mattered most. She turned off her lamp and lay in the dark, listening to the penthouse settle around her. Somewhere in the building, Mr. Woon was still awake. She was certain of it. Jiho's fever came on fast. He had seemed fine at dinner, quieter than usual, but she had put that down to tiredness after a long study day. It was only when she went to check on him before her own bedtime that she found him curled on top of his covers, still in his clothes, his face flushed and his breathing too shallow for sleep. She had her hand on his forehead before she was fully through the door. He was burning. She moved quickly and without noise, the way she always worked in the hours when the household was winding down. Thermometer first, 39.4. High, but not dangerous yet. She got him out of his clothes and into his sleep shirt, speaking to him in the low, even tone she used when she needed a child to stay calm without fully understanding why. He was half awake, disoriented, and he reached for her sleeve the same way he had the first evening. Not grabbing, just touching, making sure she was there. "I've got you," she said. "You're okay." She had her kit in her room. She carried a basic medical kit in every placement without exception. Fever reducer, electrolyte powder, a cold compress. She retrieved it in under a minute, set everything out on Jiho's desk with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before, and was measuring the correct dose when the door opened behind her. She had not called for anyone. She had not made a sound. Sung-ho stood in the doorway in a dark shirt, no jacket, his hair slightly uneven in a way that told her he had been asleep. His eyes went immediately to Jiho, and in the space of 1 second, every layer of composure she had ever observed in him simply disappeared. It was not dramatic. It was actually the opposite. He went very still in a way that was entirely different from his usual stillness, not controlled, not deliberate, but frozen. The way a person goes still when fear arrives faster than they can manage it. He has a fever, Sia said, keeping her voice level. 39.4. I'm handling it. Sung-ho crossed the room. He sat on the edge of Jiho's bed and put his hand on his son's face, and something in that gesture, large hand, careful and gentle, told her more about this man than anything she had witnessed in the past weeks. The distance he maintained was not indifference. It had never been indifference. It was the behavior of someone who loved so completely and so unguardedly that the only way to survive it was to build walls, and the walls had simply been standing so long he had forgotten they were a choice. Appa, Jiho murmured without opening his eyes. I'm here, Sung-ho said quietly. In Korean, then again in English, as if the second saying of it made it more true. I'm here. Sia administered the fever reducer, got the electrolyte mixture into Jiho in small, patient sips, and positioned the cold compress. Sung-ho did not move from the edge of the bed. He did not speak to her or ask questions. He watched her work with focused attention, and she let him watch because it was clearly the only thing keeping him from the edge of something she could not easily name. When Jiho's breathing steadied and his body began to lose some of its tight, feverish tension, Sung-ho exhaled slowly. Just once. It was the most unguarded sound she had ever heard from him. This happens occasionally, she said, pulling the desk chair to the bedside and sitting down. Children his age run high fevers quickly, but they also come down quickly. I'll sit with him. I'll stay, Sung-ho said. It was not a challenge. He said it the way Jiho asked for things. Placing it on the table and waiting. Then stay, she said simply. They sat on opposite sides of Jiho's bed as the hours moved. The city outside the window was still doing what cities do at 2 in the morning, glowing, restless, indifferent. Inside the room, everything was quiet and close and focused on one small sleeping boy whose fever was already beginning to drop. Somewhere around the 3rd hour, Sung-ho spoke. When Jiho's mother left, he said, he stopped eating for 4 days. He was 3 years old. He would not tell me what was wrong. He just stopped. A pause. I did not know what to do. I have never known what to do with him. Sia looked at him across the bed. You came when he needed you. You do that every time, even when you don't know what comes next. That is not nothing. Sung-ho looked at Jiho. It is not enough. No, she agreed. But it is the foundation that everything else gets built on. He was quiet for a long time after that. Not the loaded quiet of a man refusing to speak, but the quiet of someone genuinely sitting with something and turning it over carefully. Just before 4, Jiho's temperature dropped to 37.8. Sia checked it, recorded it in her notebook, and looked up to find Sung-ho watching her with an expression she recognized from the study, that space where warmth was beginning to be permitted. Go and sleep, she said. I'll stay until morning. He stood slowly, looked at his son once more, then at her. Sia. It was the first time he had used her name without being invited to. He is fortunate, Sung-ho said. To have you here. He left before she could answer, which was perhaps fortunate, because she was not entirely sure what she would have said. She turned back to Jiho, smoothed his blanket, and settled in to wait for morning. The invitation had arrived 3 days after Jiho's fever broke. A charity gala, hosted at one of the city's oldest hotels. The kind of event where powerful people gathered under the pretense of generosity and spent the evening reminding each other of their place in the order of things. Sung-ho attended these events twice a year, Mr. Park had told her. They were not optional. They were, in the language of the world Sung-ho occupied, a form of communication. Ji-ho had been invited specifically. That was unusual. Sia had noted it without comment and spent the following 2 days paying closer attention to Mr. Woon than she normally allowed herself to show. He had been quieter than usual since the morning she had overheard him in the lower floor, still present at every meeting, still positioned at the edge of every room, but something in his energy had shifted. A tightening. The specific kind of stillness that preceded movement. She had not yet found the right moment to tell Sung-ho. The information in her notebook felt simultaneously urgent and fragile, and every time she had moved toward the opportunity, something had interrupted, a call, a meeting, the consuming business of Ji-ho's recovery. She was beginning to understand that in this household, the right moment would not arrive on its own. She would have to create it. But tonight came first. Ji-ho wore his white suit. She had expected nothing less. She wore charcoal. A fitted dress rather than her usual blazer and trousers, a concession to the occasion that felt mildly foreign. When she appeared at the top of the stairs, Sung-ho looked at her for one moment longer than necessary before looking away. She filed that away and said nothing. The hotel was everything the penthouse was not, loud with music and conversation, bright with chandeliers, full of people performing versions of themselves for an audience. Sung-ho moved through it the way he moved through every room, and the crowd adjusted around him without being asked. Ji-ho stayed close to Sia's side, his hand finding hers within the first 5 minutes, and she held it without comment. The first hour passed without incident. She watched the room the way she always did. Left to right, near to far. She noted the exits, 4 of them, 2 obvious, 2 less so. She noted the catering staff, the event security, the configuration of the tables. She noted which of the guests watched Sung-ho openly and which ones watched him from angles. She noticed the man near the east corridor on her third sweep. He was dressed as event staff, white shirt, black vest, the small earpiece that most people would assume was standard for the venue. But he was not working. He was holding a tray and had not moved in 11 minutes, and his eyes were not on the room in the broad, managing way of someone responsible for the event. They were fixed on a single point. Ji-ho. She looked for the second one without moving her head and found him near the main entrance, positioned identically. Same stillness, same focused attention. And then a third, at the base of the staircase leading to the mezzanine level. A triangle. The same geometric logic as the park, tighter now, and inside a building. Her grip on Ji-ho's hand shifted. Not tighter, just different, the way you adjust your hold on something important when the ground changes beneath you. She leaned down to Ji-ho's level. I need you to walk with me to get a drink, okay? Nice and easy. He looked up at her and understood immediately that this was not about a drink. He nodded once, very small, and fell into step beside her. She moved toward the interior of the room, away from all 3 men, navigating the crowd with deliberate casualness. She needed Sung-ho without crossing toward any of the 3 positions and without moving Ji-ho toward an exit alone. She found Mr. Park first. She reached him and said, close and quiet, 3 men. East corridor, main entrance, base of the stairs. They are watching Ji-ho. We need to move him now, and we need Mr. Ryu. Mr. Park's face did not change. He touched his earpiece once. Within 90 seconds, Sung-ho was beside her. She told him in 12 words. 3, positioned in a triangle, all fixed on Ji-ho. Now. His jaw tightened once. Then he put his hand briefly on Ji-ho's shoulder, firm, steadying, and looked at Sia with an expression that asked a single wordless question. She answered it by already moving. She took Jiho through the interior corridor toward the hotel kitchen, the most direct route to the service exit she had identified during her first sweep of the building. The kitchen was loud and bright and full of movement, and she moved through it with the confidence of someone who belonged there, keeping Jiho close, speaking to him softly and steadily, her eyes never stopping. The service exit opened into a side street where two of Sung-ho's cars were already idling. She got Jiho into the back seat and climbed in after him. He was pale but steady, and he had not made a sound through any of it. She put her arm around him and felt him lean into her side with his full weight for the first time, not just touching, not just reaching, but leaning, trusting, entirely. The door closed. The car moved. Sung-ho got in 2 minutes later, his expression carved from something very cold and very deliberate. He looked at Jiho first, checking him the way she had learned he always did, quickly and completely. Then he looked at Sia. "The triangle," he said. "How did you see them before my men did?" "Your men were watching for threats to you," she said. "I was watching for threats to him." The car moved through the city in silence, and Sung-ho did not look away from her for a very long time. The safe house was a 40-minute drive from the city. It sat at the end of an unmarked road behind a tree line thick enough to swallow headlights, a low, wide building that looked from the outside like nothing worth stopping for. Inside it was functional and deliberately plain, no chandeliers, no marble, no floor-to-ceiling glass. Just solid walls, covered windows, a kitchen stocked for long stays, and enough rooms for the small team Sung-ho had brought. For guards, Mr. Park, Sia, Jiho, and Sung-ho himself. Mr. Woon had not been told where they were going. Sia had made sure of that. On the ride from the hotel, with Jiho settled against her side and the city falling away behind them, she had finally spoken. She had taken the folded paper from inside her notebook and passed it across the seat to Sung-ho without preamble. He had read it in the dark, using the glow of his phone, and the quality of his silence afterward was the most frightening thing she had heard from him yet. He had made 2 calls. Short, quiet, in Korean. Then he had put his phone away and looked out the window and said nothing else for the remainder of the drive. Jiho was asleep within 20 minutes of arriving. Sia sat on the edge of his bed until his breathing was deep and even, then pulled the door to and stood in the narrow hallway for a moment, feeling the particular exhaustion that came not from physical effort but from hours of sustained alertness finally being permitted to release. The kitchen light was on. Sung-ho was at the counter with 2 cups already poured, plain tea, nothing elaborate. He did not look up when she entered but pushed 1 cup toward the opposite side of the counter in a gesture so natural it seemed like something they had always done. She sat on the stool across from him and wrapped both hands around the cup. For a while neither of them spoke. The safe house was quiet in a way the penthouse never was, no city hum beyond the glass, no distant rotation of guards, no sense of a machine running just below the surface. Out here the silence was complete, and it pressed the 2 of them into a kind of closeness that the penthouse, for all its proximity, had never quite managed. "You knew about Woon before the gala," Sung-ho said. It was not an accusation. Just a fact being placed on the table. "I wasn't certain enough," she said. "I needed to be precise before I brought it to you. You could have come to me with what you had. And if I had been wrong," she said. "In your world, a wrong accusation does not simply get corrected." He looked at her. "You were protecting yourself." "I was protecting the integrity of the information," she said. "There is a difference." Another silence. He turned his cup slowly between his hands, and she watched him do it and thought about the study, and the fever, and the gala, and every moment in between where this man had shown her, in increments so small they were almost invisible, that the walls he lived behind were not permanent structures. They were doors. Closed, yes. Heavy, yes. But doors. "Woon has been with me for 9 years, Sung-ho said quietly. "He was recommended by my father." Sia said nothing. She understood that this was not information. It was the weight behind the information, and it needed space rather than a response. 9 years, he said again, almost to himself. Then he set his cup down and looked at her directly, and the expression on his face was one she had not seen before, not the measuring look, not the guarded warmth of the study, but something raw and tired and completely undefended. I am very rarely wrong about people. You weren't wrong about me, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. No. That may be the only thing I have gotten right in the past month. The kitchen was very still. The tree line beyond the covered window made no sound. Jiho was asleep down the hall, and the guards were at the perimeter, and for this one unguarded moment there was no contract and no hierarchy and no carefully maintained distance between them. Just 2 people sitting across a narrow counter with cooling tea and the full honest weight of everything that had been building since the first evening in the penthouse. Sung-ho stood and moved around the counter. Not quickly. Deliberately, the way he did everything, giving her every opportunity to redirect the moment if she chose to. He stopped close enough that she could see the tiredness in his face clearly, the kind that went deeper than one difficult night. She did not redirect it. This is not something I know how to do, he said. Low and direct. I want to be honest with you about that. I know, she said. It would complicate things considerably. I know that too. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and tucked a single loose curl back from her face, one small, careful gesture that contained everything neither of them had said across all the careful evenings and measured silences and slow, incremental trust of the past weeks. Sia held very still and let herself feel the full weight of it. Then she put her hand briefly over his, just for a moment, before lowering it back to the counter. Jiho wakes early, she said quietly. Sung-ho looked at her. Something in his expression settled, not disappointed, but understood. Patient in the way of a man who had learned, finally, that some things were worth waiting for. Good night, Sia, he said. Good night, she said. He left the kitchen. She sat with her cooling tea and the quiet and the particular feeling of something that had shifted permanently and could not be shifted back. She did not mind. She woke to the sound of glass. Not breaking, just shifting, a single quiet sound that did not belong to a sleeping house. Sia was on her feet before she was fully conscious, the trained part of her brain already moving while the rest caught up. She pulled on her clothes in the dark, tucked her feet into her shoes, and was through her door and into Jiho's room in under 30 seconds. He was already sitting up. His eyes were wide and alert, and she understood in that moment that he was his father's son in more ways than one. He had heard it too. She crossed the room and crouched in front of him, hands on his shoulders, voice at the lowest register that still carried, "We are going to play a very quiet game," she said. You do everything I say, exactly when I say it, without a sound. Can you do that? He nodded. No questions. No hesitation. She helped him into his shoes and took his hand. The hallway was dark. She did not turn on a light. She stood at the door for 3 seconds, listening, mapping the sounds of the building against what she had memorized during her first hour of arrival, because this was what she did in every new space, every new household, every unfamiliar room. She learned the exits before she learned anything else. There were sounds at the front of the building. Low, controlled movement, professional, not frantic. At least 4 people, possibly more. The main entrance and the east side simultaneously, which meant the perimeter had already been compromised, which meant this had been planned with knowledge of the safe house layout. Woon. She moved with Jiho toward the back of the building, away from the sounds. The kitchen. The service door she had noticed the first morning, plain, unlocked from the inside, opening onto a path that led into the tree line 30 meters behind the house. She heard Sung-ho's voice somewhere at the front of the building, sharp and commanding, and then a sound she had never heard from him before, a controlled, focused fury that was nothing like anger and everything like power. She kept moving. The kitchen was dark and undisturbed. She guided Ji-ho to the service door, checked the window beside it first, clear, then eased the door open 1 centimeter at a time until the gap was wide enough. Cold night air came through, carrying pine and wet earth. She looked down at Ji-ho. He was watching her face with complete concentration, taking his instructions from her expression rather than waiting for words. She held one finger to her lips. He gave a single nod. They went through the door. The tree line was 30 meters of open ground. She did not run. Running created noise and movement that carried in the dark. She moved quickly and low, keeping Ji-ho beside her, her body angled between him and the building at all times. The grass was damp and muffled their steps. The trees came up around them and she kept going until the building lights were broken by enough branches to give them real cover. She stopped behind a wide trunk and pulled Ji-ho close. He pressed against her side without a sound. She could feel his heart beating fast, but he was controlled, breathing through his nose, doing exactly what she needed him to do. She held him and kept her eyes on the building and listened. Inside, things were not quiet. She could hear it even from here, the sharp, percussive sounds of a building being taken back room by room. Sung-ho's voice twice more, brief and directional. One crash, heavy and final. Then silence for nearly a minute, which was somehow louder than everything before it. Ji-ho's fingers found her sleeve. "He'll be okay," she said, very quietly, and she meant it with a certainty that surprised her. She had seen what lived beneath Sung-ho's composure that night in the kitchen, not just warmth, but something ancient and immovable. Whatever was happening inside that building, the men who had walked into it had made a significant miscalculation. 4 minutes passed. Then 5. Then the service door opened and Mr. Park stepped through it, his eyes finding them in the tree line with practiced efficiency. He raised one hand, open palm, steady. All clear. Sia exhaled once. Then she straightened and walked Ji-ho back across the open ground. Sung-ho was in the kitchen when they came through the door. He had a cut above his left brow, shallow but bleeding in the careless way head cuts do. His jacket was gone. He was standing completely still in the center of the room, and when Ji-ho came through the door, something in his entire body changed, the focused lethal energy of the past minutes dropping away instantly, replaced by something that looked almost like relief made physical. Ji-ho crossed the kitchen and walked straight into his father's arms. Sung-ho held him with both hands, eyes closed, and did not move. Sia stood in the doorway and looked at the two of them and felt the tightness in her chest finally loosen, slowly, like a knot worked free after a long time. After a moment, Sung-ho opened his eyes and looked at her over Ji-ho's head. The cut above his brow was still bleeding. His expression was stripped of everything except the truth of what he was looking at. She held his gaze and did not look away. "Woon?" she asked quietly. Sung-ho's jaw tightened. "Handled." She nodded once and looked down at Ji-ho, still pressed against his father's chest with his eyes closed and both fists curled into the dark shirt. The boy in the white suit, finally held properly. She reached out and smoothed his hair once, gently, and he leaned into her hand without opening his eyes. Nobody slept for the rest of that night. Ji-ho was the exception. He fell asleep in his father's arms in the kitchen, deeply and completely, the way children do when the body decides that enough has happened and simply closes down. Sung-ho carried him to his room and set him down with a care that filled the small space completely, and Sia pulled the blanket up and they both stood there for a moment in the quiet dark before moving back to the hallway without a word. The safe house became operational again within the hour. Mr. Park directed the cleanup with the efficient, expressionless competence of a man who had done this before and would do it again. Sia stayed out of the way of that and found what she needed in the kitchen, a first aid kit in the cabinet above the refrigerator, where she had noted it the morning after they arrived. She set it on the counter and turned to find Sung-ho already in the doorway, reading her intention before she voiced it. He sat without being asked. The cut above his brow had dried to a dark line but needed closing properly. There was bruising developing along his left jaw and a deeper damage in how he was holding his right side, controlled, compensating, the specific stillness of someone managing pain rather than being free of it. She worked without speaking, cleaning the cut first with antiseptic, feeling him remain completely motionless beneath her hands. Up close, in the plain kitchen light, the damage was more visible, not just from tonight, but accumulated. The faint older marks that lived in the margins of a face that had been in difficult places for a long time. She pressed the closure strips into place with careful fingers. "Your ribs," she said. "Two, possibly. Not broken. Bruised." "You're certain?" "I've had broken ribs before," he said. "I know the difference." She accepted this and wrapped his midsection with the firm, even pressure that would give it support without restricting his breathing. He watched her face while she worked, and she let him watch because there was nothing in her expression she was trying to hide from him anymore. When she was done, she stepped back and gathered the used materials, and he remained sitting, which was unusual. Sung-ho did not remain still in spaces unless he was thinking carefully about something. "At the gala," he said, "you put yourself between Ji-ho and the exits." "Yes." "At the safe house, when the attack began, you went to his room first." "Before any exit." "Before any communication." "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "That was not in your contract." "No," she agreed. "Most people who work for me operate within the exact boundaries of what they are paid to do. Not beyond them." A pause. "You have been operating beyond yours since the first week." Sia leaned against the opposite counter and looked at him. The kitchen light was plain and honest, and there was nowhere for either of them to retreat to, not that she wanted to. "Ji-ho needed someone in his corner," she said. "Not an employee. Someone who would not calculate the cost before deciding whether to move." "And Sung-ho," he said, quietly. Using his own name the way people sometimes do when they are asking about themselves from a careful distance. "Did he need that too?" The question sat between them, unhurried. "Yes," she said. "I think he did." He stood. The movement was slower than usual, the ribs, the accumulated weight of the night, but he stood fully and looked at her across the narrow kitchen with an expression she had been watching develop for weeks, layer by careful layer, and which now had nothing left covering it. "I have built everything in my life to be self-contained," he said. "Every system, every structure, every person in it. Accountable, replaceable, operating within defined limits." He paused. "You do not operate within defined limits." "No," she said. "I don't. It should concern me." "Does it?" The silence ran long enough to be its own answer. "What concerns me," he said, "is the thought of this without you in it." He said it plainly, the way he said everything important, without decoration, without softening. Placing it on the table and letting it be exactly what it was. Ji-ho. The Empire. The thing that happens after tonight, when I dismantle what Woon built and rebuild the trust inside my own house. I have the men for that. I have the resources. What I do not have," he stopped. "Say it," Sia said. "What I do not have is someone who sees the room the way you see it," he said. "Every room. Not just for threats. For everything in it that matters." His eyes moved over her face, taking their time. "You saw Ji-ho when no one else did. You saw me when I was not showing anyone anything to see." Sia looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the sky beyond the covered windows had begun to change, the deep black softening at its edge, the first gray suggestion of morning working its way through the tree line. The night was ending. Everything that came after it would be different from everything before. "You should sleep," she said. "Your ribs need rest, and Ji-ho will want you there when he wakes up." "I know," he said. But he did not move immediately. He looked at her the way he had in the car after the gala, long and complete, revising something, settling something, closing a distance that had been open for a long time. Then he crossed the kitchen, and before he reached the door he paused beside her and said, very quietly, close enough that it was only for her. "Thank you. For all of it." She felt the words land somewhere permanent. "Get some sleep, Sung-ho," she said. He left. She stood alone in the kitchen as the morning came in and thought about contracts and walls and the specific courage it takes to stop maintaining both. They returned to the penthouse 3 days later. The drive back was quieter than the drive out had been, not tense, just settled, the way things are after a storm has passed and the air has finally cleared. Ji-ho sat between them in the back seat, his sketchbook open on his knees, his pencil moving with the quiet concentration she had come to love. He had not asked many questions about the night of the siege. He had asked one, the following morning, looking at his father's bandaged brow over breakfast, "Are we safe now?" And Sung-ho had said yes, and Ji-ho had accepted it and returned to his food with the particular trust of a child who has learned, finally, that the word yes from this person means exactly that. Sia watched the city come back into view through the window and felt something she had not expected. She had driven into Seoul for the first time weeks ago as a professional on a clean assignment, her clipboard in her lap and her boundaries clearly defined. She had known exactly who she was and exactly what she was there to do. That clarity had felt like security. She understood now that it had also been a kind of hiding, the same hiding she had recognized in Sung-ho's distance and Ji-ho's silence and the rigid, unlived-in order of the boys' bedroom. All of them hiding inside their structures. All of them waiting, without knowing it, for something to make the hiding unnecessary. The penthouse looked the same from the outside. Inside, it had been changed. Sung-ho's team had spent the 3 days of their absence working through every layer of the household, staff, security, communications. Everything that Woon had touched was examined and rebuilt from the ground up. New faces at the door. New protocols. The thin-smiled man's absence was present in every room like a space where furniture used to be. Ji-ho walked in, looked around once, and went to find his room. Sia followed him as far as his doorway, watched him place his sketchbook on his desk and his pencil tin beside it, organized, deliberate, his own small system of order, and felt the fullness of how much had changed since the first evening she had stood in this same doorway and looked at a bedroom that belonged to a display rather than a child. She went to her own room and opened her bag. The contract was in the interior pocket where she had kept it since the night she signed it. Folded into thirds, crisp and precise, her signature across the bottom in the clean, unhurried letters she had placed there what felt like a different lifetime ago. She took it out and held it for a moment, reading nothing, just feeling the weight of it. Then she carried it to the main sitting room and set it on the low table. Sung-ho came in a few minutes later, jacket off, moving with more ease than he had managed at the safe house, the ribs healing, the exhaustion lifting. He saw the contract on the table and stopped. He looked at it. Then at her. "I'm not renewing it," Sia said. Something moved across his face, quick, involuntary, the beginning of something he controlled before it fully formed. She watched him do it and felt a familiar affection for his instinct to manage everything, even his own reactions. "Sia, let me finish," she said. He closed his mouth. "I came here as a professional," she said. "I had a code and a method and a very clear set of rules about what I would and would not do. I signed a contract that defined exactly where I stood in this household and exactly what my presence here meant." She looked at the folded paper on the table. "That contract does not cover what I actually am to this family. It never did. And I am not willing to keep pretending that it does." She reached down, picked it up, and tore it cleanly in half. Then in half again. She set the pieces back on the table and looked at Sung-ho. He was looking at her with that expression, the one from the kitchen at the safe house, fully open, nothing covering it. The expression that had taken weeks to reach the surface and now, having arrived, seemed to have no intention of retreating again. "What are you proposing?" he said. His voice was even, but there was something underneath that she recognized. The same carefulness as the kitchen counter, the same deliberate patience of a man who understood that some things were worth getting exactly right. An equal arrangement, she said. I stay because I choose to. Because Jiho is, she paused, finding the honest word, mine, in the way that matters. And because you need someone who sees the room the way I see it, and I am not willing to do that as an employee. Sungho was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved through its afternoon with total indifference to what was happening in this room. And the other thing, he said carefully. Between us. That too, she said. On equal terms. Or not at all. He crossed the room and stood before her, close in the way he had been in the safe house kitchen, deliberate, unhurried, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. She did not change her mind. He reached out and took her hand, properly this time, his fingers closing around hers with the same care she had watched him use with Jiho on the night of the fever. Careful and complete. Equal terms, he said. From down the hallway came the sound of small feet and a door opening, and then Jiho's voice, bright and unhurried. Asia, I drew something, come and see. And she looked up at Sungho and something between them settled into place like the last piece of a thing that had been quietly assembling itself all along. Come on then, she said, and they walked down the hallway together. Every story I write is a reminder that what you feel is real, and it matters. If this one moved you, tell me in the comments. And if you're ready for more stories that make you believe in love, in healing, in starting over, subscribe and ring the bell. New stories land every other day. The next one could be exactly what you needed to hear. Thank you for supporting this channel.